The U.S. Department of Justice, currently run by Pam Bondi, they just filed a federal lawsuit against a very tiny town in the state of Idaho, which said they did not want a Christian hate church setting up shop in a particular part of their town. Now, they didn't say that, but that's the end result of it. And now the Justice Department is saying, how dare you not allow this hate church to set up shop there? Because the church crowd says this is religious persecution, and the town's leaders say this has nothing to do with your religion. And this is where I wanted to get into it. The reason this is even controversial at all is because we are talking about a church run by this guy over here. And if you're not familiar with him, that is Doug Wilson. He runs Christ Church, which is based out of Moscow, Idaho. And it's one of those churches where they kind of took over a small town and it's a big town, relatively speaking, in Idaho, but they started taking over that town. So if you see Moscow, Idaho in the news, Doug Wilson is in the news. You know what I mean? And I think at the time he started, it was like 900 members of the church in a town of about 25,000 people. Like, it's not a majority of the town by any means, but it's not insignificant. And that was years ago. They've only grown since then. Anyway, Doug Wilson, who is Doug Wilson? What sort of weird stuff does he believe? Well, you should know that Pete Hegseth of leaked Signal chat fame, he's the defense secretary. He's a member of one of Doug Wilson's affiliate churches. So that's not great. During the pandemic, Doug Wilson's church held massive indoor maskless church services for over 1,000 people in July of 2020. So when you were not supposed to go out, certainly not mingle with crowds, this guy was hosting giant, massive, maskless church services well before vaccines were available. Members of his church staged a protest that year outside City Hall in opposition to sensible COVID restrictions. This is a place where a church staffer once tweeted this. This is before the 2020 election. Brothers, a friendly reminder for elections. Make sure your wife votes exactly as you do. Because, of course, men control their wives. And part of me is like, well, why wouldn't your wife vote the way you do? Surely you and your wife share the same values, but that's not what he's getting at. He's very much hey, whip your woman in shape and make sure she votes the way you tell her to vote. That's what he's going for. Wilson has also said that allowing women to vote means taking it away from families. Because some women, if they don't vote the way you're supposed to vote, you're actually hurting a different family that might want to vote for someone, like a Republican. Also, what else? A Vice article about the church's inner workings found that, and I'm quoting here, women are told they must defer to church leaders and cannot say no to their husbands. Men are taught to strictly control their homes, and those who speak out can be isolated and harassed. Here's another thing Doug Wilson has said. This is from an actual tweet that linked to a broader story. Doug Wilson, why sodomy is worse than slavery. That is a thing he actually said once. And then here's an article Doug Wilson has posted on his website. What does this one say? Abortion is at least as great an evil for Black culture as slavery was. Yeah, and he's the expert in knowing what Black people went through with slavery. Mother Jones has also said, this is from just like a week or two ago. Just read the first paragraph right here. This is from this month. Doug Wilson made a big announcement. In July, his church will be opening a branch in Washington, D.C., just blocks away from the U.S. Capitol building. In a blog post, Wilson, a self-proclaimed Christian nationalist, wrote that he believed that the moment was right to bring his version of Christianity to the nation's capital. We believe that there will be many strategic opportunities with numerous evangelicals who will be present both in and around the Trump administration. So this guy's moving to, or he's branching out to DC to start up his church. That's Doug Wilson, and that's his church. And that's why it's kind of creepy when they want to come to your town. So he's, again, like I said, he's in Moscow, Idaho. He wanted to set up a church plant in Troy, Idaho, Troy, Troy, Idaho, which is like 15 minutes away. So that's where they hit a snag, because in September of 2022, they needed to rent out space for their church, right? They didn't have enough for a building. So they decided to rent out space in a local bar on a Sunday morning, which I don't know, that strikes me as blasphemous to some people, but whatever. I don't personally care. But they rented out space in a bar. And the next month, the city said, hey, you can't do that because this is a business district. And if you're renting out space in this part of town, you have to do it to make money for us, like taxpayers. So if you want to open up a bar, that's fine. But if you're trying to run a church in this part of town, well, you can't do that. You need permission from us. Anybody needs permission from us to use space in the business district for that. It's called a conditional use permit, CUP. And that's it. You didn't go through the right channels to set up shop here. So in November, a church leader said, okay, we hear you. Check this out. I'm going to show you this. This is Google Maps right here. They decided this is the business district part of town. It's a small town, a handful of shops over there on your left, kind of not jam-packed place on the right. But look at this place right here, Ye Old Bank. It used to be a bank. It's no longer being used as a bank. So Christ Church decided to rent out that building and set up shop there. They said that has enough space for an office and a makeshift church. And the way the lease was set up, they could use it part of the week and then coordinate with the landlord so other people could use it the rest of the week, whatever. But again, this is in the business district, so they still need a CUP. You still need that conditional use permit. And in order to grant a conditional use permit, the city had to have a public meeting to vote on it. And that means it's public, right? People can show up. And it turns out people did show up in person to oppose this move. A lot of them said they don't want a divisive group moving into their town. I think of the 19 people who spoke at this meeting in January 2023, 17 opposed the permit. A couple of them said it's because of the hate group vibe of this group, this religion. But the town's attorney said only a couple people mentioned religion. Most of them mentioned that they opposed this for reasons that had nothing to do with religion. If they want to, here's the big thing you got to understand about this community. They are trying to build up a very small town. How do you build up a small town? How do you encourage people to move to your community so you can get property taxes and you can get them spending money in your community? Well, you need to give them places to shop and eat and play. And so this business district, it's like a 2-block stretch of a place that's literally called Main Street. They want businesses to move in there, and not like hotels, because, hear me out, they don't have like a giant parking lot in that area. So if there's a hotel there, you would have to park on the street, and that means other people could not park on the street and go shopping in that area. They want like grocery stores where you're in and out and spending money. That's what the business district ought to be. And so a lot of people said, we don't want this church moving in to this area because this is our business district. We want money-making places coming to this part of town. Has nothing to do with their faith. And for that reason, there were a lot of people who wrote in to why they objected to all this. But after taking everything into consideration, in March of 2023, the city council said, we are denying you the permit. And they said, the reason we're denying you the permit has nothing to do with religion. It's because you did not enhance the commercial district. Basically, you're not making money for this part of town, and we need this part of town to make us some money. They said, if you want to use the church as office space or for other reasons, you could do that. They also said giving the church the permit would create a problem in the community, because think about the parking and the traffic, right? If you have church service and all these people are coming to your church, they are then going to take up the street parking, which means other people cannot come to that area to go shopping. And what happens if the church wants to meet more than once a week, which is the case for this church? Now you're shutting out like Wednesday nights or something, and no one can make use of the other businesses. So this was not about faith. This is about how you use that space. Here's another problem. The city Idaho law says you cannot sell alcohol within 300 feet of a church. So what happens if you put a church smack dab in the middle of the business district in your town. All of a sudden, you're no longer able to open up a restaurant. Maybe a restaurant wants to come in to your community, but if they wanted to sell alcohol to you, they couldn't do it. And if a bar wants to move in, they could not do it. So that's another reason that there was a problem with this. Now, the law also says you can't have it within 300 feet of a school. And there used to be a school in that area, but there wasn't one anymore anyway. And they did mention there was public opposition to the church, but that's not the sole reason they denied the permit. So anyway, I hope all of this makes sense. They're not denying this church because of Doug Wilson. They're not denying it because of what these people believe. They're denying it because this is the part of town they are trying to build up. In fact, the city's attorney, his name is Todd Richardson, he posted this message later on in 2023, basically talking about the denial. He said the application sought the conditional use permit to allow the building to be rented to a religious organization. The city followed the law when we denied the CUP, blah, blah, blah. This goes on for a while. But look at what he says. This is all about a C1 business district. The whole business district, this is in italics at the top now, it's intended to preserve and enhance the downtown business sector along a turn-of-the-century theme. Basically, they want to create a place you can walk and go shopping and spend your money. And in order to preserve this area of town, to build it up, so we have a core downtown area so that people might want to live nearby. And that's a good thing for the city. They basically have the right to set up these rules that way. And he said, look, someone's complaining about us to the Department of Justice. This is under Joe Biden, complaining that the city violated the rights of their church by denying the permit. But again, this guy's saying we didn't do anything against their religious views. Despite the city acting properly and denying the claims made against it, the Department of Justice says it wants to proceed with an investigation. We are cooperating with the DOJ. What else does it say? We do not know and cannot estimate when the investigation will conclude. It may take several months. And look at this part. During the period of the investigation, and depending on what's learned through the investigation, perhaps into the future, the city is not going to take any legal action against Christ Church for violating our zoning policy. And what he was saying there is, if your church wants to meet in that old post office, we're not going to kick you out of there anytime soon. We'll let the investigation run its course, and we'll decide what to do after that. And we will continue working with the Department of Justice and their attorneys to try to resolve this in a way everyone feels is fair. So that's what he posted at the time. This is October of 2023. So that investigation under the Trump administration was still ongoing. Like, there were no updates to it. But last month, the city was told, hey, now you're under investigation by the Trump administration for violating the law. And this is where the local townspeople stepped in, the local town leader stepped in. They passed this right here. This is a temporary ordinance that kind of cleans up their rules in a way that I guess they kind of had loose rules about how to run this city, which is not surprising. It's a small city. They don't have a gazillion lawyers floating around there. But they said, look, we are making some new rules specifically about how you can use these conditional use permits. And what they're saying is there's certain things that are not going to be allowed at all in the business district. Specifically, like an aquarium, no. Auditorium, civic organization, library, museum, or planetarium. None of these places are allowed to set up shop in the business district. Why? Because even if you had a library, that's not making money for the community. A museum might with admission fee, but now you need parking, and we don't have parking in that part of town, so no museums. No one can use this space except for retail shops. And look at what they say near the bottom here. You can't have a theater. You can't have a movie theater here. You can't have a church or religious facility. You can't have a clinic. Can't have a dance hall, etc. So basically, everything is the same. You got to be a retail shop or else no. That's the new rule for city permits moving forward. They thought this would fix the problem of the church saying, how dare you treat us this way because we're religious, right? And so they thought, okay, well, let's patch up our laws to make it make sense. And guess what happens now? Last week, the Department of Justice announced this. This is, again, U.S. District Attorney's Office, District of Idaho. Justice Department files religious liberty lawsuit against Troy, Idaho for discriminating against a small Christian church. And check this out. There is a law called the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act. And it basically says, you know how Christian bakers say, I don't have to make a cake for trans people that violates my creative religious freedom. And they're using a law called the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. This law, RLUPA, basically says you can't discriminate against a church using like zoning laws. So it's like the zoning law version of RFRA. But they say here, this is Harmeet Dillon, who is another right-wing kook. RLUPA unequivocally forbids local governments from deciding zoning matters based on their dislike of certain religious groups, which has nothing to do with any of this. The Department of Justice will not hesitate to file suit against jurisdictions that discriminate on the basis of applicants' religious beliefs. Again, has nothing to do with this. The lawsuit alleges that the city's denial of the conditional use permit imposed a substantial burden on Christ Church, and it was based on the community's discriminatory animus against the church. It also said the city's zoning code treats religious assembly use worse than non-religious assembly use. And again, this is why the city passed that temporary ordinance that said we're treating everybody the same. So anyway, the government's going after this town, and they're saying you're discriminating against this poor, small Christian hate group that calls itself a church. The town's lawyer responded with this on Facebook, facing off against the US DOJ. Unfortunately, the facts claimed by the feds are simply wrong. I suspect this will be a fight. The town and the people of Troy are being unfairly and dishonestly characterized as fighting against a church when what they are doing is trying to preserve a 2-block business district that is to be a turn-of-the-century walking business commercial center for the town. The rest of the city is open and welcoming to any church. And that is true. If you look at the map of Troy, Idaho, there are several churches in the community. They're just not on those 2 blocks that are meant to generate revenue for that area. So I called up that dude. I called up Todd Richardson, and I'm like, what the hell is going on here? Actually, before I tell you what he told me, I did want to show you, this is what he said to a local news outlet after this was filed, because he was way more blunt to them. The permit was not denied because they were any particular church, but because of the demand they put on our scarce city resources. The church meets multiple times a week on a street that has no off-street parking. They fill up the downtown parking and they flood the residential area. We have worked for 2 years with the DOJ trying to negotiate an agreement. We learned more about the DOJ's position when they filed that complaint than when we did in the 2 years prior, when they were talking to each other. When I called him up, I'm like, so what happened in those conversations? He said, I would ask them, what is it that you need our community to do so that you feel everything is fair? And they wouldn't answer the question. I believe that was true under the Biden administration, and it carried over with the Trump people. But they wouldn't answer it. It wasn't until they filed the lawsuit that they laid out their case for why they think this is illegal. And I'm sure part of him was like, well, why didn't you just say that? We could have passed this temporary ordinance earlier if you wanted to. There is another. He also said he actually sent a letter to the DOJ May 13th. This is just before the DOJ filed their lawsuit, where he basically said, I'm going to jump down here. Look at the bottom. The city has repeatedly expressed an interest in working with your office toward a resolution. However, your office has consistently and flatly refused to provide any information to the city or to discuss in any detail what problems you claim and refuse to discuss resolution. It's not the city that has been slow to agree to work on this issue and toward a resolution. And so due to the refusal of you to speak with us about any details, the city has done something. We passed this interim zoning ordinance that treats everybody the same, that clarifies everything. So are you good now? And the DOJ responded by saying, haha, no, we're suing you. Like, the city has tried to resolve the issue. And part of me thinks the reason they're doing this is because they like the headlines. This is what the Trump people do, right? They want the headlines that say, we are defending a Christian church against this evil, evil town. Meanwhile, the town is like, we have a bunch of churches here. It's friggin' Idaho. You know they're pretty much all Christian anyway. They're like, we tried to work with you on this. What the hell? Another thing I just want to point out, there's no reason the people of Troy, if they really want to be a part of Christ Church, you know what they can do? They can drive 15 minutes to the city of Moscow. Why can't they do that? Is that such a hardship for them that they're not able to practice their faith unless there's a church in their back door, in their backyard or something? Like, this is all about beating a nearby community into submission. It's a flex of power by this extremist religious group and their allies in the government, which Doug Wilson is cozy with. And I think it's something judges should consider. Todd Richardson told me he sees this as an act of bullying. I will also tell you that in my conversation with that lawyer for the city, Doug Wilson's name, Christ Church's name, never came up once within that conversation because he is not interested in litigating their beliefs. Never came up. This is all about, he was really pushing that whole business district thing. I would also tell you, he laid out for me, just so I understand what a small town is like for him. He said there are about 6 to 10 large events in Troy, Idaho every year. And what does it mean if something's a large event? That means about 50 people come to the center of town to do whatever it is that they're doing. Maybe like a carnival comes into town. What Christ Church wants to do is bring 80 to 150 people to their building multiple times a week. That's why it would take over the business district, all the parking spaces. That's why those parking spaces would flood into the residential areas around that zone. That's why the city had to say no to this. They would basically make it impossible to grow a true, healthy, vibrant business community in Troy, Idaho. I will also tell you that I spoke to one other lawyer who is an expert in land use and has done a lot of these cases. And he shared with me something he saw in the Fed's lawsuit. He said, before they pass their interim, we'll treat everyone the same ordinance, this is what they did. And what this says is, what if you want to build an art gallery in a certain region of town? Well, if you're a C1 business district, you need permission to get that license to set up shop. And if you go down, this is what the feds are saying. Look at what it says for schools. You might need a conditional permit or a temporary use permit, whatever it is. But for churches, it's all conditional use. You got to get approval from the city across the board. And he said that's the main reason the feds are able to say the city discriminates against churches in a way they are not discriminating against schools or parks or museums, because the rules are different for churches. And again, the city tried to fix that with this temporary ordinance they passed, but apparently the Justice Department's like, haha, too late. We're not interested in you fixing the problem. We just want to destroy you forever having the problem. And this land use expert said a lot of small towns, they have these sort of records on the books, and they don't even know that they're supposed to fix them because the laws have changed over time. They never got around to fixing those archaic laws. So now you can go after them if you want to. So I don't know how this is going to end, but I can tell you, but talking to everyone in Troy that is representing the city, this isn't about religious discrimination for them. They just want to try to build their town, and Christ Church is intent on destroying that opportunity. Okay, I know that's a long story. I think 3 of you are going to watch this segment later on, but whatever. I thought it was important. I'll stop there. What questions do we have here before I move to a story I know you will appreciate? They should open a combination church / microbrewery. Man, there's a lot of churches that have used bars to attract people because Jesus ain't doing it. So it's not a bad idea, but they would need permission from the city. And honestly, I don't think the city would have said no if the church said, don't worry, we'll sell products and you could tax it or whatever. Not a bad idea. That's exactly what I was thinking. The DOJ wants the publicity. Yeah, like it's very possible they just chat GPT'd the lawsuit and a judge is going to toss it out and they're not going to care. You think the feds are like, you think the Republican government is interested in the outcome here? No, they want the headline saying we are protecting churches. So vote for Republicans because this is what we do. Doesn't matter what the details are.